Hey everyone, Wooden Railway Edward here, and this kind of feels like a blast from the past, and the reason being, it has been a really long time since I've done an unboxing video, almost 7 months now, and the reason for that being, I haven't had anything to unbox. I did have a couple Thomas Wooden Railway 2022 items in reserve in preparation to make this video, but in addition to not really having that many items, I just didn't really have that much time to film a video like this. And especially, I like to make these videos in batches. So for example, those first 3 videos I made of the Thomas and Friends Wooden Railway 2022 items, they were made sequentially. I filmed them all over the course of a couple of days, just for some more cohesion, and so that they kind of flowed better with my commentary among them. However, it has been a while since I've purchased those items, of course, as I mentioned before, so I'm getting back into the swing of things. You saw that Thomas and Friends Flea Market Finds video, and now we are going back to the roots, per se, and taking a look at more Thomas and Friends Wooden Railway 2022 items. And here in front of you, we have Toby and James. And I felt like these two would be good to pair together. They kind of feel like a dynamic duo. Of course, they've been featured together in many different episodes. Off the top of my head, I can think of Time for Trouble, a very classic Season 3 episode where both of them star. They're kind of co-stars. And I think they work off each other really well in the television series. So why don't we try to capture that a little bit, taking a look at both of their models. And especially these two, I feel like their models deviate quite a bit from their standard classic Thomas Wooden Railway models, so it will be interesting to compare them with their older counterparts. And now, of course, I have both of their older counterparts, and we'll do that in a second. Let's start off with the smaller model first, which is Toby. And Toby is a very interesting model in this range, as I feel like he is one of the biggest deviations, as I mentioned before, from his original model. Let's bring in Toby's original model, and you can see that it is pretty plain. It is basically a block of wood with a roof and his side plates, plastic side plates. He has 2 wheels, and of course a classic smiling face, as do most iterations of the Wooden Railway models in this range. However, with this range, the newer one, they decided to switch it up a little bit and give different expressions to the engines. So for this model, they decided to give Toby a worried expression, which I think suits the character of Toby, especially his depiction in the CGI series, which is what this range is mostly targeting their models, kind of relating them to. So it makes sense in that sense. However, it is kind of a bummer, as I think I've stated before in these videos, that they do have this face tied to this model, as this is the standard Toby model that, you'd find on shelves, the stock standard model, and the only expression he comes available with is that worried face. There's no smiling face or anything like that, so that is a little bit disappointing in that sense. However, I still think that it is a pretty good model. As you can see on the front here, it is a little bit different. You can see that the width of his main body is much smaller than the cow catchers, so that will be interesting to experience in person. Of course, here is Toby, and I think it's a good time to mention where I bought these items from. So Toby and James were purchased from Barnes & Noble. They were purchased with a gift card. You can see here Toby was $17, which I think is pushing it a little bit for these smaller Thomas and Friends items, or rather, should I say Thomas Wooden Railway items. However, I did have the money on the gift card, so at that point, it's just free spending. So I decided to bite the bullet and finally purchase this guy. I was holding off on purchasing some of these Wooden Railway items, specifically the Thomas Wooden Railway 2022 items, for a while, as I just didn't really feel like paying for them. But as I said, now that I got that gift card and I kind of got back into making these videos, I thought it was kind of my duty to try to complete the line. And now there will be a couple of models that I don't think I'll ever get, such as Kevin. I don't really like his model that much, and I don't really see a reason to purchase his model. Also, someone like Nia or Kenji, I don't really know if I'm ever going to get them. Probably. But the other two items that I really have my eyes set on are Rebecca and Emily. I think those would be good models to get. But besides that, the range is pretty much done. And at this point, I think it's safe to say that they're probably done with this range and it's defunct, which is very upsetting and really disappointing if I'm honest. I had high hopes for this. Originally, I just thought they were prototypes that would never come out, but eventually they did in wave 1 and 2, but we never got that third wave. As I said, it is pretty disheartening that we never got any more of these items. I think it had real potential, but with just how things are going with Mattel and toys, physical toys in general, it was kind of in the future for this range that it wouldn't be as successful as probably many of us hoped. And just going to Barnes & Noble, I haven't seen any of these items move in months, so I don't think that they sold that well either, which is also pretty disappointing. Looking on the top really quick, you can see that there's Toby, in a couple different languages, and the track here doesn't have the dirt design that some of them do. I failed to mention that here on the back it does have that tab design, although at Barnes & Noble, at least the one I went to, these are just sort of on an end display with some Brio items, and they're just sitting on a shelf. So I'm not really sure what this was ever used for. If these are sold in other stores, I've only ever seen them in a Barnes & Noble, never at a Target or Walmart or anything like that. So that could also be part of the problem why these models don't sell well. So let me unbox this and then we can take a closer look at it. So here I've cut the wire and we'll take Toby out. And that was actually much less painless than some other times I've tried to unbox these. He had a little bit of a rubber band attached right there to keep him sealed in the package. And I will be keeping this package, as I think all these boxes are pretty cool, how they have this sliding feature. And I think, once again, that's another example of how this range was actually pretty forward-thinking and really a fresh start for Thomas Wooden Railway. And pretty unfortunate that wasn't able to continue. So we'll put Toby, the new Toby, I should say, on the clickety-clack track and roll his old counterpart up next to him. And yeah, it is a very weird looking Toby. He does look a little bit shorter than the older counterpart, and also obviously a little bit thinner. It looks like Toby's been going to the gym, maybe a couple runs, because his body part is very thin. And it does look a little bit awkward. I'm not sure if I necessarily really like it. He does have 3 wheels, which is accurate to his actual model. Something that this model never had, as I feel like on corners they were a little against putting the 3 wheels on there, which there's nothing really wrong with that. That's probably standard for most Thomas Wooden Railway items, such as this. For example, Mavis only had those 4 wheels. However, this Toby has the 6 wheels. You can see the design of the wheels is a little bit different. You can see that they're thinner than the standard wheels that come on the other Thomas Wooden Railway 2022 items. His name is the same, how it's printed vertically like this, the Toby and the little cloud right there. He does have nice designs on the wheels. I do like those. And the cow catcher and side plates are pretty much the same. You can see there's printing on there of the buffer beam, and it's red with the buffers depicted in black. I'm not really sure why these magnets are always kind of dirty. It doesn't really make sense to me as they were brand new. So how are they already scuffed up and stuff like that? I don't really know. His face, it's a good Toby face, and I think the printing and molding there with the nose is pretty good. Although I don't think anything will really ever top this Toby. His nose is a little chipped off, so you can't really see the design, but that just screams Toby to me. Like, I feel like that's a really great Toby face. This one, I think it's pretty good. Capturing a more cartoonish along with the CGI series design, I think it suffices. So, on the side right here, once again, it has sort of that grainy printing that is very common for these Thomas Wooden Railway 2022 items. I don't really know why they did that. It kind of feels like, I don't know how to describe it, kind of fuzzy. It's like a projection that is not very clear, and you can kind of see the fuzziness. I don't really like it that much, but as I said, with this line, there's many different quirks and different things. So for what it's worth, at face value, I think it's okay. And on the side right here, he has the 7 and the doors. And on the top right here, he has the depiction, I guess, of where the steam would come out of and the little bell that he has. On this Toby, of course, he has no such printing. He just has these 2 magnets up here. And I guess that would be considered an improvement on this Toby, that he has those details up there. On the back, he has a headlamp, and I should mention on the front, he also has a lamp. And I should say this is not a headlamp, obviously, the back lamp and a headlamp. So that Toby will just show a comparison of how thin he is. You can see the top right there, and he does not have like any overhang of the top. The top is actually, the roof part is smaller than the actual body, if you could even imagine that. It's even smaller. And I feel like the Toby I have here runs a little bit funny. If you can see on the track, I don't know if you can see that, but he kind of jolts around on the track if I roll him like that. And especially on the clickety-clack track with the grooves and stuff. You can see, and then this Toby, well, you can hear him too, but you can, he runs a lot smoother. So that's just a little interesting thing I noticed when rolling him around. But I think that this Toby is a pretty good depiction of Toby. And I think for this range, it's probably middle of the pack, maybe towards the lower end, as I just feel like they could have probably extended his body's width a little bit more, and I felt like that would have made it a little bit more accurate to his actual model, and also just a little bit more normal, I guess you could say, to the eyes of someone trained with Thomas & Friends merchandise specifically for Toby, as he diverts quite a bit from other depictions of Toby, not just in Thomas Wooden Railway, but also in other merchandise ranges. However, as I said, I think he's a perfectly fine model, and I think that face really is growing on me. It's kind of funny how it looks like he's looking up towards the camera. I don't know what I did to Toby for him to look at me like that, but you know what? The other one seems kind of happy, so I think I'm okay. You know what? Maybe Toby's worried about the next item we're going to be taking a look at, which is James, and that will be a very interesting model to take a look at. When the revitalized Thomas Wooden Railway merchandise range was first unveiled in 2022, I remember that there were many items that I wasn't the biggest fan of, and although my views on many of these models have shifted and softened over time, there are still some characters that don't quite sit right with me. And for example, one of those characters is James the Red Engine. And when they were initially unveiled, for example, characters such as Thomas and Gordon, I was ecstatic with their models, and later on, characters such as Henry and Hero. However, James always felt a little bit off, at least in my opinion. And I think that might have something to do with his classic depiction in Thomas Wooden Railway, which has stayed fairly consistent throughout the years. Here is an example of one of those Jameses that I'm talking about. This is the early 2000s redesign of James, which was in conjunction with a broad redesign of many of Learning Curve's models in the early 2000s. Of course, his 90s variant, along with other main characters in the range, were quite a bit different. His boiler was a lot thinner and his face much smaller. However, at least in my opinion, these early 2000s models that Learning Curve produced of the Steam Team are some of my favorite depictions of their characters in the Thomas Wooden Railway merchandise range. And I think that although there's some nice detailing, the simplistic design of these models really encaptures what makes Thomas Wooden Railway so endearing for many different people, including me. And throughout the years, he has stayed very, very consistent. If we think about when Tomy took over the range for a year, and then eventually when Mattel bought out the range in 2013, James and many of the other characters in the Thomas Wooden Railway merchandise range have stayed almost the same. Of course, their face has changed a little bit and maybe some other minor details, but the standard design of, for example, smaller tender engines being this length with a tender like this has been that way for a very long time. But if we take into account this James right here, you can start to see where some of the differences really are. He is radically different from this model of James that has been pretty much the same for 20 years. And this James, you can see that his boiler is much thinner. He has a taller dome here, and he's much more elongated. His running board goes quite a lot longer, and where his smoke box and face are is much further back on this main part of his body right here. Up here, you can see his face is much closer to the magnet. That is not the case for this James. And I just feel, when looking at this James initially, it is like they just stretched out his model a lot. And I think for me, it just kind of made his proportions kind of wonky, and I really wasn't the biggest fan of it. However, I think that if we take this James out of the packaging, maybe my viewpoint will change a little bit. And that is because since I've been so accustomed to this James, I'm kind of apprehensive to them changing and redesigning all of these Thomas Wooden Railway items. However, like I stated before, change is often something that will happen eventually, and I think that if I shake off the feeling that something is so different, I might grow to enjoy these items quite a bit more. And James might just be one of those. On the back of the packaging here, you can see that he was $22. I purchased this James at Barnes & Noble. You can see the little plastic hook back here that I don't really know, as I stated before, the purpose of this little hook right here, as at least in Barnes & Noble and maybe any other shelves that these items have been on, I've never seen them hung up like that. They've always just been on a shelf, never hung up. So I don't really know what the purpose that is. It must be used for something, obviously. And on the top here, you can see it's James in several different languages. And I should mention that he has, on the back of the packaging here, that little flap where you can open him up from the back. We, however, are going to open him up from the front. And this packaging has kind of been the bane of my existence here. You can see that there's a wire attached to the bottom of his model right here next to the wheels, where he is held into the packaging for theft-proof purposes, but it is excruciatingly hard to get him out of this without the scissors clipping his model in some way. So I might have to do this off camera just so I can make sure that James is fully intact when I get him out of the packaging here, as I don't want any of his paint to chip or any dents in his model. I was able to get his tender out, so if I can't get the rest of his model out, we'll just compare James's tender to his older one. I was finally able to get his model out of the packaging after a lot of struggle, and here you can see that actually on camera, he looks a lot smaller than he did in the box. And I think already I'm starting to see that I will like this James a lot more than my initial impressions over the last couple years. And I also probably should mention that the reason it's taken me so long to get this James is that honestly, I've just been putting it off. I've gotten all of the other items in the range, practically, at least in the Steam team. I haven't gotten characters such as Rebecca or Nia yet. However, the only other main character that I need to unbox is Henry, who will be coming soon. However, James was just really never on the top of my list. With his proportions, I just didn't really like his model and didn't really think I needed it. However, now that he's out of the packaging, I'll put him up against this James, and you can see they actually look pretty good together. And I think that the problems I had with this model are all pretty much superficial in their extent of quote-unquote ruining this model, and I don't really think that they do. The only thing that's kind of weird is just how long his running board is in comparison to his boiler length. And you can see here that it's just kind of weird that his smoke box sticks out that far. You can see the overhang right there, and I don't know really how accurate that is to his actual depiction in the television series. Although something I will point out that I really like is that his wheels right here in black, I think that actually looks really, really nice. And this wheel design has grown on me quite a bit in the last couple years that this range has been on shelves. It's crazy to believe that this range is over 2 years old now, and although we haven't gotten new models for a really long time, I'm hoping at least in 2025 that there is something released in conjunction with the 80th anniversary. Hopefully something interesting like that will release. Maybe that celebration pack that was leaked a long time ago. On the bottom of the chassis right here, you can see that it has that James with the little cloud right there and some production information. And if we move him back to the side, you can see his wheel arches. He has 2 right here. And if we bring him side by side comparison with his older variant, you can see mine is a little bit wonky. That's just how he's always been. But it's the 2 wheel arches, which is consistent here. However, instead of right on the edge right here, him having that detailing, he has detailing instead for the side rods and the pistons, which I think is pretty interesting. It's a nice inclusion, although I don't like how it doesn't extend all the way down and you have that little red bit right there. He has some rivet detailing and that firebox glow that's on many of these items. And he still has the lining, for example, on his side of his cab right here. He has that lining. He has the depiction of a handrail right there, and also on the side of his boiler. His dome right here is noticeably farther up on his model, and off the top of my head, I don't really know if that's more accurate to his TV counterpart, but on this James, you can see his dome is a lot more gold, and also much further back, closer to his whistle right here. Also, it's important to mention that on this James, this part of his firebox right here is sort of extended up towards his roof, but also indented right here on his running board. Well, this James, this part right here is a little bit lower, and it's no difference with the width right here of his cab. On the back right here, you can see that there's no indent for where his crew would be, and I think that's kind of a shame. It looks a little bit plain without that. However, it's not a make or break for this item. I don't think there's that much more to say about his details, although once again, I will mention that it's just weird how his smoke box sticks out with his face. I don't know if I really like that. Speaking of the face, you can see that it's a pretty good James face. It's more in line with his CGI depiction, and I do like the little wrinkles around his eyes, and I think honestly his smile is pretty good, and overall I think that does really scream James, at least in my opinion. Just a little bit different than what this James was going for. And I think if we had, for example, the 2013 model of James made by Mattel, it would be much more in line with that model, at least with his face right here. I also failed to mention he has buffer detailing. I think that's pretty consistent with all of these 2022 items. And of course, with these older items, only a couple items such as Scruff and Porter ever had buffer detailing. So that's kind of weird that was so inconsistent. But at least I can say with this model, they were consistent with the buffer detailing. Also, if you look right here, just random things that I'm noticing with these 2 models. You can see his funnel is a lot more open than on this model. And also, it's kind of funny how much his nose sticks out. You can see compared to this one sticks out quite a bit, which is kind of interesting. If we take a look at their tenders really quick, I'm still not the biggest fan of these tenders. And I think it's just something that I'll never really get over. Just something about how tall this black part is just makes this tender look kind of dumb. And I'll always rather enjoy these designs of the tenders. If we put them alongside this tender, honestly, he doesn't look that bad. And if I put this James with this tender, you can see that just doesn't look right. I think just how the wheels are so spaced apart, and once again, how long this black part is right here of his chassis, it just doesn't look right. And the tender detailing is nice. He has the number 5, a little handrail, and the rivet detailing. And on the sides right here, there's no printing, but he has a nice molded coal right here, and the slants, of course, of his tender. However, I just don't like how tall it is and how wide the wheels are apart. And yeah, it just doesn't really look right to me. I think that's still one thing about this James that I really don't like. And it really does affect some other models, such as Rebecca in particular, I'm remembering. Her tender just looks really weird. And I don't know why they did these with these models. I think, honestly, he'd look a lot better without the tender right here. But besides that, I think he's honestly a pretty good depiction of James. On the camera, it doesn't pick it up exactly, but this James is a little bit different red color than this James. I do like the nice shiny coat on this item. On this one, it's more of a matte finish and a little bit more rough in its design with the paint right here. And I think that's been a complaint of some of these items, that the details kind of look stamped on and they kind of are a little bit blurry. But honestly, with this James, I think actually his details look really, really nice. And that's not a complaint I have with this item, at least in particular with this James model that I got. His item looks really nice. And I think for $22, it's not a horrible deal. And I can't honestly remember back in the day what these smaller tender engines went for, maybe around there. And I think for what you're getting, $22 isn't a bad deal. And of course, I think on Amazon, probably you could get them for a little bit less. But I had a Barnes & Noble gift card, so I splurged a little bit on this item. And also an item we're going to be taking a look at in a later video. And really quick, I don't know if I mentioned where I got Toby from. I think probably I mentioned I got him from Barnes & Noble, but I can't exactly remember. So just for reference, he was $17, which I think is actually is a little bit steep for his model. For $17, I don't know if this is necessarily worth it. However, I think that all in all, these are pretty well priced. And hopefully they sell okay. I don't know necessarily if they actually do, at least in the non-online retail sense. I don't know if at Barnes & Noble they really sell all that much. Every time I've been there, they've been basically in the same place. And on Amazon, I'd assume they probably sell a little bit better. And at least from what the buzz has been recently, I think that Mattel is mostly shifting to make these online exclusives, which is a little bit of a shame. If you think about 7 years ago when Toys R Us closed, maybe not 7 years, maybe 6 years ago in 2018, that was really the beginning of the end for Thomas & Friends merchandise in stores. Of course, Target and Walmart have some stuff, but it's mostly push along, which is not really that interesting to me. And the era of really great Thomas toys is kind of over, at least in this sense. So that's a little bit disappointing. However, I am very happy with these models. I'm glad that I finally got them. And for the most part, my Steam team 1 to 7 is complete, with the exception of Henry, who we'll be taking a look at in an upcoming unboxing video. But now I can say that after 2 years, I'm a proud owner of engines 1 to 7, plus some other characters, such as Hero and Diesel, and some other characters we'll take a look at soon. But for the most part, actually, I've completed this range. I only have, I'd say, 4 characters that I don't have, which is Rebecca, Nia, Kevin, and Kenji. And for example, Kevin is an item I don't think I'll ever get. He's just kind of stupid. And Kenji is a maybe. It's cool to have a new character, brand new, that was never released in the original Thomas Wood and Railway. Actually, I was going to say Thomas Wood, but he did have a Thomas Wood model. But I'm still on the fence about him. Maybe if they go on discount as they liquidate stock near the end of the year, maybe I'll pick him up. But for right now, I think that's enough said about Thomas Wood and Railway 2022. And I thoroughly enjoyed reviewing these models. If I had to rank them, I'd say that this Toby is probably near the bottom, I guess I would say, for the range, and this James too. And I know I just said I thoroughly enjoyed reviewing them, but just in the grand scheme of things with this range, I think these are some of the lesser models of the range. However, that's not to say that they're not good at all. And I think they've actually grown on me quite a bit. And now that I have them physically and I'm looking at them, I think they actually look pretty good. So with all that said, thank you for watching this video, and expect many more videos in the future. This is Wood and Railway Edwards signing off. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.